Hello and welcome to the We're Not Experts History podcast with your usual hosts, myself, Sarah and James. Today's focus will be on Basildon in Essex, and instead of just talking about its history, we're actually taking a step back and listening to the people who lived it. In this episode, we're joined by two guests now in their 80s who both spent their early years here in Basildon. We'll be talking about what the town was like in those early days, the memories that have stayed with them, and how the place they grew up in has changed over the years. Okay, so let's meet our guests. So if you guys could just share your name with our listeners, and if you don't mind, what year you were born.
Well, I'm not so sure about that. Name's Ken. I was born in 1944.
Oh,
and my name is Geraldine Evans, and I was born in 1945.
So
very old.
Well, you don't look it. Ken does,
Ken
but
does.
Geraldine doesn't.
Oh, it's the alcohol. It's a good preservative.
So welcome to the show, and let's start with some questions.
Yeah, so we'll start with, when did your families first come to the area?
That's interesting. Depends how far you want to go back. If we talk about my great-great-grandparents, they came to the area in 1883 and were with the rector, Maurice Stacey Clark, who became rector of Langdon cum Basildon, because the two parishes from the church perspective were combined back in that time. And he came as our groom and gardener. My grandparents, they moved around once they got married. I know my nan was actually christened at Basildon Church, Holy Cross, but they moved around the country a fair bit until they came back in 1928, when my mother came back with them, obviously.
Yeah.
And she was 8 at the time. So we go back as early as, shall we say, 1928, really, although I can trace ancestors back to 1883.
Wow.
My dad had an elder sister who was 18 years older than him. She moved to Banj in 1937 when she bought the lease of an old pub called the Barge. She ran the Barge during the war years, and my mum and dad moved down in 1945 to take over running the pub, and 1945 was the year that I was born.
I'll come in again.
Go for it.
Right. What I like to say, when my grandparents moved back down with my mother in 1928, they moved to Langdon because it wasn't all known as Basildon in those days. Although Langdon, from a church perspective, was linked with Basildon, so it was all the individual parishes before the new town came into being. So I always consider myself a Langdon boy, albeit I now live in Langdon Hills.
Langdon, yes, not Langdon Hills,
Yeah,
Langdon
yes, no, don't
Hills.
you dare say Langdon Hills.
I hope there was a map around with Langdon Hills written on it. There was one's at hand.
Just upsetting.
So what was it like when you were younger?
You've stolen my question.
It's written down for me there. What was it like when you were younger? What can you remember from when you were younger? Don't look at me like that. You wrote them. So what do you remember of the area?
What I remember, when I listen to most people when they talk about their childhood now, I come to the conclusion I had a quite idyllic childhood. But our bungalow we lived in, I had cornfields all round us.
That does sound idyllic, actually.
We had cornfields all round us, so we were able to play in the cornfields. In fact, on Guy Fawkes night, we used to build a big bonfire there, and the children from just up the street and that used to come every year. And on top of that, you did the old penny for the guy, etc. We could roam everywhere, to roam out over past St Nicholas Church, on its way to where the new town was built. But we could wander out down there, but you could spend hours just wandering around, and we would only go home basically when we were hungry. But at the same time, if we wanted to play in addition to playing there, we would play in the streets because there's just hardly any traffic. I can remember quite clearly getting a chair from the kitchen, put it in the street, play a game of cricket, go in, have something to eat, and just leave the chair there, not worried about traffic. So it was very idyllic.
Is it still there?
not the chair still
Yeah,
there.
no.
It wouldn't surprise me.
check.
Yeah.
But no, it when I think back, it was, it was terrific. Can't say any more than that. So in some respects, you do worry about the fact that children are not able to roam as much as they could in those days. We used to just roam everywhere. Our parents probably never knew where we were. Tree climbing, you name it. Haystack climbing, etc. And it didn't change for the first 10, 12 years where I was living.
Did you have a similar
I
experience?
totally
Geraldine?
concur with everything that Ken has said. It was an incredibly safe environment to grow up in. As young children, you could walk about, and same as Ken, you only went home if it got dark or you were hungry. And sometimes you took a picnic with you and went up to the heights and sat up there and had where the plotlands used to be. And there it was just a lovely, lovely, friendly place. And everyone locally was your aunts and uncles, as a courtesy type.
Yeah, that is true, because obviously being in Langdon, you had the Langdon High Road where all the shops were. So, most days your parents would wander off down to the shops, just walk, or if you went down to the shops with them, you went with them, and you just spoke to people and talked to people as you went through. The one thing I would say, though, from my point of view, is that then never often referred to the Christian name. It's normally always the surname, even if the neighbour right next door and you knew them. Nowadays you'll just refer to their Christian name, but everybody was always extremely friendly, weren't they?
Nobody ever locked their doors.
No. Oh, no.
It was a totally...
No.
Well, that
lovely
leads on
environment.
to my next question. What was I think you're describing it really well, but what was the community like back then? Were there any events or local traditions back in those days?
Well, if you take Langdon itself, right, you look at all the numerous drama clubs around. There's 4 or 5 drama clubs you can name. The main one is now called Basildon, which was the Langdon Operatic District Society. Even Joan Sims, who was a famous person in the Carry On film, she was born at Langdon Station. My uncle and aunt were in the Operatic Society. 2 aunts, in fact. 2 cousins later on. My grandfather used to do the scenery and was also in the operatic. My nan, when they used to run the operatic from Langdon High Road School, used to do the teas. So, but there was many others. There was various Langdon drama clubs, even from, I say the community centre, but that would have been the Memorial Hall in those days, from the school, etc. And then as we grew up as well, I don't know whether that's still around, but one of the advantages is that the school always had a youth club, and you could go to the youth club at least once a week, which is normally on a Friday night.
I went to youth club.
Oh, you did go to
yeah. I mean, I didn't grow up in Basildon, but
no, the youth club. And you had plenty of sporting clubs going along. There was obviously the cricket, more so in those days. There was the football. Obviously, there's more sport going on now, sporting activity for youngsters than we had then, but that was sufficient. No, there were stacks of little communities going on all the time. And of course, you had your churches with, and you had a lot of not only churches, which are obviously the Anglican churches, but you had a lot of small non-conformist mission churches forming up, and then they would have all their various activities going. It didn't necessarily always based around the religious scene. They can go along just for coffees and teas and everything. No, there was a lot going along. It was Langdon itself was a real community. There's no question about it. I can only assume Pitsea, Vange, Bowers Gifford, all these other places were the same.
Well, the highlight of the social year in Vange was the Vange and Pitsea Carnival.
Oh, yeah.
And that was led by my uncle, George Saunders, who was a local baker, dressed as John Bull on his horse called Enoch. And there's a lovely picture of him and Enoch in the barge. Enoch used to go everywhere with George Saunders. It was there was lots to do. Everyone was either brownies or went to Sunday school. Sunday school was big. Everyone went to Sunday school, and there were lots of local things going on that people joined in, and it was just a very, very friendly place.
Yeah, can I butt in there again? Yes, I agree. I forgot all about that. With the church, went to Sunday school.
Yeah.
Always went there. I was with the Church Lads Brigade. Remember marching with them up to the church. I didn't go to the Cubs for some reason, but I ended up with the Scouts. And one of the things I enjoyed more than anything was Bob a Job Week. Go off around
Bob a Job Week.
They're just not allowed to do it now. But that was great fun.
Yeah.
You know, cutting people's lawns and all this sort of thing for a few extra shillings.
And I also pick up on what Ken was saying about drama groups. Drama was my big thing. And I did actually form a drama group in Basildon, which perhaps we can talk about later. It was called the Basildon Youth Players. Oh. And we put on our own production. And I had written my own version of Sleeping Beauty.
Oh, wow.
I've got my folder with all the pictures of it in.
Oh, well, that'd be interesting. I mean, I think you guys have pretty much answered what would have been James's next question.
Yeah, that's really the next question. You skip on to the next one.
About what people did for fun. But so just moving on to, obviously you guys have talked a lot about growing up in Basildon, but as you got older, did you find that your relationship with the town changed? Either through the work that you did or if you had a certain role in the community?
Well, it depends on what period you're actually talking about. I have one grudge against the new town when it came on board because I was born in 1944. I've lived in the area, shall we say, all my life, except for 5 years. And that was due to the Basildon Corporation. Quite clearly, my father obviously had a fairly good job, which when we were compulsory purchased in 1963, which I know a lot of people had a lot of problems with, I don't think we did. My parents were able then to acquire a piece of land over in Langdon Hills, where they had their own house built. When I got married then, a couple of years later in 65, I approached the council, because you're looking for a house, obviously, approached the council, and they said, well, yes, you can go on the council list, but you're number 4,000. So when I hear people say they're on the housing list at 4,000 these days, I don't bat an eyelid. Why don't you speak to the corporation? So I spoke to the corporation, and their immediate reply was, sorry, you're not second generation. Because my parents, or as if corporation here, my parents lived in a house that they own themselves. So though we'd lived there, and as you say earlier, I can actually trace us back to 1883, we weren't classified as second generation, albeit the new town come about for two reasons. One, obviously for the overflow, but it wasn't one of the initial new towns that were nominated. The main reason it got there is because the Essex County Council and the Billericay Council at the time that controlled the area went to the government and said, can you nominate as a new town so you can improve our infrastructure? And so as far as I'm concerned, the corporation, let us down, let a lot of people down who lived in their own homes, owned badly. That's the one grudge I've got about the town. Other than that, I have no other grudges.
Billericay have never complained about it once ever since.
Well, they never probably had a problem.
I had three main roles in the town. First of all, 1967-68, I was Basildon Carnival Queen, and I had an awful lot to do with a lot of charity work during that year. And in fact, here at the Green Centre, they'd been able to show all my press coverage for that 1 year, and it was quite remarkable. And sadly, when I was only 20, my mum died, and I then took over the role running our local pub, running a business, and I was a pub landlady there for 37 years. And for 27 of those years, I was also a local magistrate, which came about because Basildon got its own magistrates' court and they needed to recruit more magistrates. And we had a very forward-thinking chair then of the magistrates' court. And he looked to not just the normal type of magistrate, he looked for people that actually grew up and worked and lived within the community. So those three roles were all very different, but incredibly interesting.
Yeah, I bet. Wow.
That forward-thinking chair, that's not the one you left in the road to play cricket with, is it?
Probably.
No, but what I was going to say, that's where my wife obviously would have met Geraldine in the first place, because she'd become a magistrate, I think, for nearly 20 years.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
and she only gave up when she looked after me because I had a hip operation.
Your carer, yeah. One of many of us. So looking back, are there any moments connected to the Basildon that you feel particularly proud of?
Well, I think I was very proud of what I achieved as a Carnival Queen, because I wasn't just Carnival Queen. I got involved in a lot of local charities. And I also, yes, I just remembered this. The young boys were playing football and they hadn't got any goalposts. And I went on a campaign to get goalposts for them. And I got quite friendly with this little group of lads. And in the end, I took them up to West Ham to meet the players. And we, there was quite a big article in local and national press about Carnival Queen and the goalposts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, right, yes.
Beat
I
that,
think
Ken.
first of all is that the two things that I was more interested in when I was at school was sport, all forms of sport, and secondly history. Sport first of all, which enabled me then to go on and play local cricket with Langdon, but from that progressing and being coached, etc., and playing in some of the big clubs all around the county, Ilford to start with, and then finally at Southend. Whether living anywhere else I would have been able to achieve that, I don't know. But I certainly enjoyed playing the cricket in the area. But later on, because of my interest in history, once the cricket then was, taking a back seat, was able to get involved, obviously, with the Basildon Borough Heritage Society, albeit 20 odd years ago. And there's a tremendous amount of history in the area, in the Basildon Borough itself, and that just keeps us working full time. So the two main things when I think back, is obviously the cricket, building up my cricket from the area, and then moving on to the history side. I must say, having Langdon Railway Station nearby was very handy as well, because that enabled us to get up into London to get a job and move around. I worked at Full Motor Company for a time, so that was very handy. So,
Football was big, but there wasn't a Basildon football team as I remember it back then. They, all our players played for Bath United. My dad was their first president, and then eventually they moved to Itsy and built their own club there. And my grandson now plays for Bath United, and go back a long way, because they were originally a working men's club, and they needed then to change their constitution to let ladies be members. So they needed someone to sign their documents who had an official signature, and as a magistrate you could witness certain documents. And I witnessed their signing so that ladies could be members, and they made me their first member, and I was the first ever ladies member of a working men's club.
Oh, wow.
I must admit, though I played football for the schools, and played football after I left and packed up at 30, I did give up the football because it got in the way of the cricket. I have to say that sport cricket. I know dear old James is a football pal. What I will say though is, on one of the good things in the early days, which everybody who lived in Lane thought was an exceptionally good idea, they decided, the corporation, that they would build what we know as the Langdon Link, a railway running from Langdon High Road, where all the shops were. We had well over 140 shops, into where they were starting to develop the new town. Saying that, of course, in latter years, unfortunately, the link was probably the demise of Langdon, because everybody could get into the new town early. So once it started to get established, the shopping centre, Langdon High Road started to disappear, and we're still struggling to this day. Which is terrible. So I must admit, when you talk about, if you've got anything against Basildon, yes, it was all for it to start with. Then wish it had never happened, but there you are.
as I was growing up, like Ken said, there were loads of local shops. Between the barge and Pitsea Station, loads and loads of them. And now they've all been just taken over and there's just one, Tesco's.
Yeah.
You know, but when you think of how many little local shops there were, and it was just lovely little local place. I mean, Pitsea and Langdon both had their own train stations. They were quite significant towns. It wasn't till very, very, very much later into the history of Basildon as a town that it actually got its own railway station.
That's right. That's
74. I think only in 74.
Oh, it was up in the 70s.
Yeah.
It must have been. Well, I will say, though, I must say this: the first new shop that opened in the new town came from Langdon.
Is that Hembest?
That was Hembest,
Yeah,
the tailors, and they had
the
two
tailors,
shops in Langdon at the time, and it was Alan Hembest opened the first one. In fact, his daughter Wendy is one of the Basildon Heritage's volunteers.
Oh,
He does quite a lot of work
Wendy,
for us.
And I have a very clear memory of going to St Margaret's School in Barsgifford, and I was in the very first year there, and the teacher wrote a word on the board, Basildon, and she said, I want you all to learn how to spell this word, because from this week that will be part of your address.
Wow. It's weird because I
God
can't
knows how
imagine
I
it being any
remember.
different.
Yeah.
We can't even do you say that because we're from Langdon, and you know, there's no doubt there's still quite a spirit in Langdon, a community spirit, no question about that. Just on Saturday, this Saturday alone, and we have it the last Saturday of every month down at Langdon Library. We get 20, 25 people along to just chat over memories like we're doing now, cup of tea and coffee, etc. You know, so yeah. So, yeah, I was going to say something, I forgot what it is now.
Bonus. I was going to say, in Vange, you've got, here we go, the Memorial Hall. What's it called? Called the Memorial Hall?
Yes.
Well, you talk about the spelling of Basildon. I think there's several stones for people who have donated money to the building there. I think there's at least 2 different spellings of Basildon on there.
Oh, is there?
Yeah. Basildon.
Well, over the years, Basildon, over
Yeah,
many
that's fairly
centuries,
strange,
Basildon.
isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean,
been
back
centre.
then,
Yeah.
pubs were very much the centre of communities. I mean, people didn't have alcohol at home, apart from maybe at Christmas. So if anyone visited, you went up the local pub. And it really, the barge had its so many ties with the community. It was an amazing place, and we won awards for some of our community. We used to run Vange Village Fair, which was supporting the community, and we used to do pram races and anything you could think of. We did lots of different things.
That's true, because I can remember my father's many times. If you go to Langdon, you had up at Langdon Hills, you had the Crown.
Yeah.
In Langdon, you
we
had
were
Langdon
the Crown.
Hotel, and then a little bit further down in Langdon Wash Road, you had what was then the Prince of Wales, now the Note Bridge. But my father was quite a big drinker, but he never drank at home because it didn't have the atmosphere. The only time you drink at home, maybe Christmas
like
time.
more of a
Yes.
social
You know, but it
drink.
was
Totally.
I can remember that.
I mean, people then drank in schools. You know, they would, as soon as someone walked in the door, go, "Oh, get Ken a beer." But now it's so expensive to drink. Who can afford to buy a round of drinks?
Yeah.
And it has become, the pubs have all disappeared. And I so regret, because the barge was such the heart of Vange Village.
I've heard that from a lot of different
And
people, actually.
It has been lost. I mean, the building is still there, and in some respects it is nice that it's still used, but my hope would have been that it could have
It
been
stayed as
used
a pub,
as a little museum to Basildon, because so much history happened in the barge.
Yeah.
Mind you, just remember what I said I forgot earlier, is that you're talking about the addresses. I must admit, I live in Langdon Hills. I never use Basildon. I always say Langdon Hills. Sorry about that, and you'll probably find the majority of us do.
Yeah.
Same as Billericay. Billericay
Well,
wouldn't, people in
they
Billericay would never say
They would put
Basildon.
Basildon
Or
on the end, would
Whitford.
they?
But then you get people from Pitsea, and you said before that it's the only area where people from Pitsea and Langdon will say Basildon rather than Pitsea and Langdon.
I mean, I live in Vange, but I normally say
Well,
Basildon.
we get, as you know, down here at the Heritage Centre, we get a lot, obviously quite a few visitors, and we ask the question, you know, whereabouts are you from? And if they say Basildon,
Yeah,
we always
narrow it down.
then quiz them straight away. And we say, no, you live in Pittston. No, you live in Van.
Yeah.
No, you live in Bowers Gifford, or you live in Langdon. We always say, you live in the old parishes. But anyway, there you are. That's
when David Amis became the Member of Parliament, latterly Sir David Amis, he became known as Mr. Basildon because he really used to publicise throughout Parliament and everywhere, Basildon, Basildon, Basildon. So he did a lot to raise the profile of Basildon.
So when you look at Basildon today, as it is today, what changes stand out the most to you if you think back?
Well, growing up, there was virtually no ethnic mix. And now Basildon is much more ethnic mixed. Maybe that applies to towns in general, but certainly this area.
Yes, that's true. Doesn't particularly worry me in any respect, especially if you play cricket like I do. You play with all ethnic people, so I've never had a problem there at all. And some of them are very close friends of mine. I think the thing that I noticed more than anything, because I lived in a bungalow to start with, then I lived in a house, is certainly today. I don't know how they do it, and I'm not sure how I could have coped with it, is how many people do live in flats and apartments and that sort of thing, and they build them so high. For example, you've only got to look at a new development they've had down Roundacre in Basildon, Chapel Gate. They've built some quite nice looking houses, and right at the back of it, what have they done? I don't know how many stories high flats. So if you're in one of those houses, you look out and you've got 14 raised flats behind you. So I'm not sure. So I'm
getting very built up, is it? Even
from that point of view, it's getting very built up. But what I will say, because we were talking about sports earlier, is when they say, what we got for the children? You try and name a sport now that an individual cannot get involved in Basildon. Forget, you got your football, which is always the case. You had your cricket, which is always the case. Tennis, you could. Even when you were at school, if it was a question of swimming, we had to be taken, I know from, in Langdon, we were taken out to Hutton to learn to swim. But you've got swimming, you've got tennis now, you've got gymnastics, you can... Football.
Ice hockey.
I
knew there'd be one.
It might have not had ice, I'll give you that. I'll give you that, that's true.
Yeah.
But 99% of the sports you can probably get involved in these days.
Yes, the shooting club still exists.
Huh?
There used to be a shooting club up on Basildon United.
There used to be a shooting club, where there still is, but I know there's still an archery club out at Battlesbridge.
Oh, there's one in...
Oh, that's just outside Basildon.
Great Burston, there's one.
Is there?
Yeah, by Barleylands.
Yeah. But you go to the community halls you've got now, which are much larger than they were in those days, and what do the people go along there? They can play badminton, they can do bowls, they can do all sorts of things.
Formula One.
So there's... Oh, I don't... Well, right, Formula
I knew
One.
there'd be another one.
Okay, Formula One. But...
not that class as a sport.
Yeah, no, not as good. No, that's true. Who won today?
I've no idea.
Oh, I do. I won't tell you.
Yeah.
But no, so from that point of view, there is far more things other than roaming around like we used to. There is far more things the children can actually do. So I'm staggered when they turn around and say children have got nothing to do, because there is. But of course, unfortunately, you have to pay for something. Costs are all going up, and of course that means you've got to get them to it as well.
I guess it's free to roam around, isn't it? Whereas it's free to roam around, whereas to join a club or to take part in any sport.
Yeah.
My daughter has 2 boys, and the amount of money she pays. Jackson is big into football, and Dexter into jiu-jitsu, and she pays so much money to keep up with them.
Right.
So do you think you got the opportunities in Basildon that you wouldn't have got anywhere else, or do you think you were moving somewhere else you might have had more opportunities?
From a working perspective, I've had no problem. All right, but initially I worked outside of the Basildon Borough area, but it was through an advert which you saw in the local newspaper anyway, which I followed up.
Was that Kitchener? At Kitchener, was it? We need you.
So from that point of view, the opportunities seem to be around. I know there was a lot on the radio and television this morning about the unemployment for the youth. I must admit, I begin to wonder, how I would have got on in today's world. I put it down. I was lucky. I managed to get an interview at Ford Motor Company, which I moved on from there. I think the opportunity I might have got better through my cricket if I'd been more up in the metropolitan area and knew what was going on more. But I did get the odd trial for Essex and this sort of thing. But, you were just local country people. You didn't realise who you had to speak to, who you had to follow on. It's the same as my sister. I think if she'd been up that way from an athletic world, she would have gone exceptionally well. All right, she'd gone exceptionally well in the netball because she ended up captain in England. But it was the athletics that she was really at the fore to start with. District sports at the short distance of 60 and 100 metres, she was never defeated, and offered to be coached by an Olympic runner. But of course, being this local country people, my parents didn't appreciate, who to speak to, where to go, and how to follow it up. Which I don't blame them, But so, if I'd been elsewhere, I think I might have gone further on my cricketing side of things. Business-wise, I think I was more than happy. Just jumping on the train at Lane, and off we went. Not a problem.
I think being a magistrate in Basildon was very important to me. The reason I wanted to be a magistrate was because I thought I would never actually be able to have any children. And our first son we adopted when he was just 6 weeks old. And the magistrate that signed the paperwork said, this is one of the lovely things that a magistrate can do to create you a family. And I thought to myself, one of these days I'm going to do that.
Wow.
And that's what I did. And I specialised in the family courts. And I got so much thrill out of creating a family and being able to sign the papers that gave someone who thought they wouldn't be able to have children a family. I did actually go on to have 2 of my own children.
Right. But that's what kind of started
it was the kind of thing that prompted me. And also, being a magistrate was so totally different to my daytime job. And I was my dad and my late husband were quite worried about what kind of reaction I would get, because I was quite an easy to access person, because I was a pub landlady, being a magistrate. But I had nothing but respect from people. It was a really good thing to be able to do. And it was nice to feel. And people would sometimes say, is Mrs. Evans up there today? Oh, good. Which was such a nice thing to hear, even from people who could be a little bit dodgy.
Wow. Well, thank you both for joining us. And
I hope that's answered some of your questions.
Yeah.
It's a remarkable town.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what we should have said, really. A remarkable town. I've got no complaints about it anyway.
This is a song to the music of They Try to Tell Us We're Too Young to really be in love. And it goes, they try to tell us we're too young to build a real town. They say we have no past, we cannot build to last. We'll make mistakes, there'll be no living down. And yet within our hearts we know that knowledge helps the mind to grow. And one day they will find, when we've left our youth behind, that we have built a real town.
These stories remind us that places aren't just buildings or plans on a map. They're shaped by the people and communities who live there and built their lives in them. A huge thank you to Ken and Geraldine for sharing their memories with us today.